Hello, my name is Jim Fletcher, and I'm here today to talk to you about cognitive load theory and cognitive theory of multimedia learning. So, cognitive load theory has to do with the structures of working memory and how the load that we put on them during learning has an effect on how well we learned. So there are three assumptions that go along with this working memory. The first one is that it is limited to how many items it can hold. The rule of thumb is 7 plus or minus 2, and they can only hold it for about 20 seconds if it's not reinforced. Of those 7, you can only work with about 2 or 4 of those items. The second assumption is that while working memory is limited, long-term memory is unlimited. As long as you build the cues and the schema, which we're going to talk about in a minute, to recall that information. And then the last assumption is schema. And what schema is think of it as a great big library. And all the books there that you can reference and use. That's what schema is. Schema helps build a mental model that you file in your long-term memory and that you can recall as you grow and learn and live your life. There are 3 types of cognitive load. The first is intrinsic load. And intrinsic load is how well the person knows the material, whether they're an expert, novice, intermediate, how many elements that they have to learn at one time. You know, if it's really complex, there may be more than one element that they have to learn, or more than the seven elements plus or minus 2. So it makes it really complex, and it makes their working memory work harder and the cognitive load larger. The next cognitive load is extrinsic, and extrinsic is all the material that doesn't really go with the subject that we throw in, like a funny story, like if you're doing a presentation, a picture that really has nothing to do with the material. That adds to the cognitive load of the learner, and they have to learn what is important, what is not important. So the last load is germane load, and it describes the process that we use to get rid of the extraneous loads. You know, whether it be taking all the non-important information out of a program, whether it's doing a pretest or whatever. This just adds and aids the learner and their intrinsic cognitive load to know what's important and what's not important. So the next theory I want to talk about is the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. And what it says is that we have 2 channels, or dual channels, of learning. And that's through words and pictures. Audio and visual is what they call it. Now, words also have the ability to pass through both the audio channel and the video channel. Because if you think about it, if you look at a cow, you know what that is without ever seeing a word describing it. So you have the ability to do both of those. Now, there are some assumptions with the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. One is that it's limited. It has a limited capacity. And it's about the same as the cognitive load theory, about 7 items plus or minus 2, and you can only work with so many at one time. And then there's also this part that is active processing, and what it means is you need to organize, extract what you want, and then file what you want so that you can remember it. But it takes an active process to learn with this style of multimedia learning. So now I have an illustration that shows you the active parts, and if you can see where you come from the sensory into the working memory, those lines that go both ways, that's the active process. And then there's one again in the working memory that is the same way, and it goes both ways as well. These are the active processes that you see. Now, the difference between the cognitive load theory and the cognitive theory of multimedia learning is that sensory. As it was described to us, is everything kind of passes through the sensory into the working memory, and other theories don't really take that sensory memory into effect, as does the multimedia learning theory. Another difference between these two theories is the terminology, and it's like comparing a red apple to a green apple. It means the same, it'll taste the same, it's just used different words. You know, generative is germane, essential is intrinsic, and extraneous is extraneous. Is that simple. They all mean the same thing, they just use different terminology for it. So the final thing I wanted to mention is the goals of these two theories, and it's pretty simple. The goals of the two series is for an instructional designer to be able to design a lesson that extracts all of the extraneous information, puts in the intrinsic information that is needed, and uses some germane cognitive theories or germane processes that help the learner know what's important, what's not important, and what they need to remember. That's my take on cognitive load theory and cognitive theory of multimedia learning. I hope you liked it, and stay tuned for video 2 in a couple weeks. Thank you.